going to ask each of our leaders here to just give us a overview from your perspective. If you were asked, what does regional innovation mean? And what are you doing right now in your respective regions to, one, accelerate, but two, bring in more participants and players into the innovation ecosystem you're creating? And Ed, I'm going to turn to you first, because as a new president, you've really stirred up the system here, focusing a lot on building this innovation capacity.
Thanks, Deborah. Well, I'd like to maybe just start with some general points about the ecosystem we find ourselves in this region of the country. And I think there's a growing awareness, and I'm really pleased, having talked to the NSF director a number of times, that he really gets this point, that there is a lot of opportunity for innovation in our region and in regions of America, particularly rural America, that have not really participated as much or as vigorously as they could in this. And so traditionally you think about the coasts or Austin or Chicago, places like that, but there's a lot that we have to offer. And so I'm going to lay that out first. So first of all, of course, we have natural resources. Everyone knows we have all kinds of natural resources. If you were around campus today, you would have seen something about the School of Energy Resources, where there's a lot of work on alternate uses for coal, for example. We have a lot of that. We have also different ways of looking at things because of where we live. And that's really important in any innovation ecosystem. You need a diversity of backgrounds and perspectives. We have a work ethic that is second to none in places like this. It is hard. It has been hard. It still can be hard with the wind and the weather we have here, even with modern conveniences. So people have determination and grit and stick-to-itiveness and all of that. And of course, there's talent absolutely everywhere, and we have it just like every other place does. So the question is, how do we cultivate that? So of course, Wyoming and the rural Mountain West are no exception in this. I mentioned already, not just coal, but we have wind, solar, water. We provide a lot of the water for those of you living in the Los Angeles area. It comes from the Tetons, from snowmelt, at least a fair amount of it does. We have trona mines. A lot of the world's glass is made from those mines. And so in a number I saw just yesterday, kind of boning up on this, was 14 times the amount of energy we produce that is consumed outside the state than is consumed inside the state. So I heard also 10 times, so roughly at least an order of magnitude more. So we have, then think about the existing markets focusing on Wyoming that are important for the economy: energy, extraction, agriculture, and tourism. Those are probably the big four, and certainly the ones that people think about a lot. But disruptions are coming in all of them. And disruptions, of course, as technologies are applied, will completely change the landscape of those and create new markets and new economies. And we have to think about how to support that through supporting computing and technology programs at the university, and in fact, statewide. I'll come to that in just a second, and support entrepreneurship and innovation at a level that has not really been the place before, at least in Wyoming and states like ours. So if you look at things like, there's a McKinsey report on the future of work, and I'll just point out that they've analyzed market by market how jobs will be transformed by the year 2030. And if you think about it, if you're an entering high school student now, then the university's got to be thinking about when we graduate those kids, that'll be 2030. And so we better think about what markets they're going to be finding themselves in, and we got to prepare right now for all of that. And you're 4 times as likely to be displaced in the marketplace if you don't have a college degree. So we have to think a lot about working. I see Sandy Caldwell here, working with our community colleges to make sure there's a really strong pipeline coming into the university. So these are some backdrops for this. We have 70% of our graduates from the University of Wyoming that leave the state. Now, that's not a good thing, especially when you've only got 500,000 people to start with. So we've got to work on creating opportunities for our graduates to find jobs in the state, either by creating their own jobs or entrepreneurship, or by looking at new ways of corporate partnerships and so on. So I just gave a couple of points about what we're actually doing, and we'll hear more about that as we over the next day or two. But first of all, you will see we are a great gem of a university with a lot of assets. Some of you saw some of the tours this morning. You did not see things like the high bay Center for Fluid Flow and Porous Media. Some of you will know Tom Lang from Procter and Gamble, who used to love to talk about fluid flow and porous media, otherwise diapers, and pointed out how they like to simulate them on supercomputers because they don't like to do field tests. And so just one example, we have one of the world's best facilities for fluid flow and porous media, $100 million facility. We have a research station in Grand Teton National Park, the AMK Ranch, which is unique in the world. We have the NCAR Wyoming Supercomputing Center just down the street. We have a plane instrumented by the National Science Foundation, and we have Impact 307 incubation hubs, one in this campus and others across the state. Now, that is, don't worry, I'm not going to go through all these notes. That is just a bit of what we're doing. And so in the second major point, I want to talk about what we're doing at this university in spite of budget cuts. And my first day, welcome to your new job, $50 million in budget cuts and COVID-19. And oh my gosh, what about all that? So we dealt with that, but we also said we're doing new things in spite of the difficulties because we have to. 2030 is coming, right? So new School of Computing has been proposed and approved by our Board of Trustees, but it would touch every discipline in the university. A new campus-wide Center for Entrepreneurship and Innovation. Penelope Shihab is here as the leader. Gabrielle Allen is the leader of the director of the School of Computing as well. And we are working on building these out, not just as assets for the university, but in collaboration with the community colleges across the entire state. And then also looking at markets important to us, new programs, for example, in outdoor recreation, tourism, and hospitality. And I saw Dan McCoy here. Dan is right here, who we'll talk about that later. So that in itself is good, but it's not enough. So we have worked very hard with the community colleges to build out what we call the Wyoming Innovation Partnership. And innovation is a key word, as is partnership. And it's a deep partnership that says we are going to work together on programs that will lay the foundations for the future of the economy in the state of Wyoming, including incubators, entrepreneurship programs, collaborative computing programs, programs in markets that are important for us, tourism and hospitality, energy, and such areas. And we have received, thanks to support of our governor, since in the last 6 months, actually only, $56 million in programmatic funding to help build out those programs and the legislature has earmarked another 27 million for us next year if we do certain things that we said we would do. And Sandy and I are on it. We're going to make sure we do those things. So the point is, we're doing a lot. You'll hear more from Governor Gordon tonight, and I'll be talking a little bit about that going forward. The last thing I want to say, and this comes right to John, that we still think that is not enough. So we are building out collaborations across this region, particularly with the Dakotas, Montana, Idaho, and a little bit with Utah and Colorado, but they're pretty far advanced. So they can help us, but we're working to band together among these sort of Northern Rocky Mountain rural states to figure out how to organize our ecosystem in this whole region.
Thank you, Ed. And I'm going to come back and ask you to share what are some of the obstacles and the barriers that you face, both in the culture, but also in how you bring people together. But before we do that, I want to turn to you, John. You, of course, are leading one of the crown jewel labs in our national laboratory system. You're supporting the mission of the country. And many know that Idaho Lab played a very, very important role for many years in our nuclear energy capability and many other areas as well. And you also are at the forefront of doing some very exciting partnerships that involve the private sector as well as other labs and universities. So how are you really focused on this regional innovation capacity in Idaho and beyond?
Thank you, Deborah. Can you hear me okay? Yes. So first of all, thank you for being here, or for the opportunity to be here. This is really, really great. I've never been to Laramie, Wyoming before, so new experience for me. Pleasure to be here. If I may, a little bit of quick context. I lead one of the Department of Energy laboratories. There's 17 Department of Energy laboratories across the complex. 10 of them are focused on Office of Science, so basic science missions. I represent one of 3 applied energy laboratories, Idaho National Laboratory, I'll come back to that one, the National Renewable Energy Laboratory down in Colorado, obviously focused on renewable energy, and then the National Energy Technology Laboratory, which has sites in Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and Oregon. which focuses on fossil energy and carbon management. So those three applied energy laboratories actually work very closely together. As Deborah said in the introduction, our primary mission is nuclear energy research, development, demonstration, and deployment. So that is, and I'm a nuclear engineer by training, so that is where my comfort zone is, and you'll notice that in my remarks. But just in terms of the broader mission of our laboratory, I want to speak to that for a moment. We are really focused in two areas: clean energy, founded the foundation in nuclear energy, but that means nuclear energy working with all other clean energy sources in an integrated way. That means doing things other than just electricity generation with nuclear, think hydrogen production, industrial processes, and so forth. The other part of our laboratory, which is also very nicely connected in the energy space, is our national and homeland security part. So one of the things that most people don't realize about Idaho National Laboratory is that almost half of our work by business volume last year was in the national homeland security area. And then when you break that down a little bit further, where we're really most known is for physical and cyber security of critical infrastructure. Now think about energy infrastructure being built out. It has control systems throughout all of it. And cybersecurity of those control systems is absolutely critical to our lights being on right now, water, and so on and so forth. And so that's really what Idaho National Laboratory is known for: nuclear and clean energy, physical and cybersecurity of critical infrastructure. So I wanted to provide that context. And then, President Seidel mentioned the state of Wyoming being similar to the size of the United Kingdom. Our site at the Idaho National Laboratory is 890 square miles, about 3/4 of the size of Rhode Island. So that's a little factoid that I typically throw out. Really quite a massive place. It was originally selected to demonstrate nuclear reactors back in a time when we didn't necessarily understand them so well. And not virtually, all reactors around the world can trace some part of their origin, whether the technology was developed, safety basis, and so forth, to what occurred back in the 50s and 60s on what is now the Idaho National Laboratory site. So thanks for indulging me on that little bit of intro. Now, regional innovation and what are we doing? It's actually an incredibly exciting time. Deborah used the words tectonic shift in her remarks. And if we were sitting here 5 years ago, this would be a very different conversation relative to our mission. The support for nuclear energy the support for nuclear energy generally and advanced reactors was far different than it is today. Focuses on clean energy, decarbonization have really resulted in tremendous support for advanced nuclear, as well as keeping the existing reactors operational. The other things are cybersecurity risks that have changed dramatically. And so when you look at regionally what's happening, 2 of the Department of Energy's advanced reactor demonstration projects are in the Mountain West region, one up in Washington State, one in Kimmer, Wyoming, the TerraPower project. So advanced, and then there's the Idaho National Laboratory in between them, where we're demonstrating multiple reactors. The first one to occur next year, which will be the first advanced reactor demonstrated on our site in more than 4 decades. And then we've got a plan to do additional reactors after that. So the opportunity space is just completely different related to energy transition, interest in critical materials, and all the opportunities that are represented in the region, whether that's because of the energy infrastructure that already exists, the energy workforce that already exists here in this region, and then the opportunities relative to that transition from coal to other clean energy sources, using coal for other things than just burning it. And so the opportunity space is just amazing. So then maybe just a couple comments on what we're doing. Working with local utilities and power providers over in our state, Idaho Power Corporation, or Idaho Power Company, Idaho Falls Power, as we take our laboratory to net zero carbon emissions, working with a lot of other companies that we otherwise wouldn't have necessarily been working with. Companies like Micron and Cliff Bar, for example, who also have deep decarbonization goals with their own operations. And then we all understand the importance around cybersecurity. And so working with universities on workforce, working with universities on research, and then working with a lot of different companies relative to their cybersecurity needs. So it's really just quite a different time and opportunity to be working across state lines and actually across national laboratories, not just Idaho National Laboratory, including those others that I mentioned, that really is all becoming possible and becoming that opportunity because of the shifts that we're seeing in energy right now.
You know, before I get back to that question I posed to you, Ed, let's talk about energy a little bit, because you both have highlighted that the assets and capabilities in this region are in energy, and you're in the energy business. You're not necessarily just in the nuclear or fossil energy or renewable. So if we wanted to come back, and let's come back in 5 years, what do you see are the prospects of really creating this part of the country as a major regional and national hub for the energy transformation? And how would we pull all that together? The Department of Energy is going to support over $8 billion in regional hydrogen hubs. This area should certainly be one of those. But you know what, I know if Greg Hill were here with us, and we'll hear from him tomorrow. Yes, he's in oil and gas, but he's in the energy business and he's thinking very far ahead. And so, you know, I have to say I'm concerned when sometimes we hear so much talk about, well, let's get rid of our oil and gas companies. They really have the infrastructure to carry us into the future in many ways. So let's talk about what would be some of the ingredients and the partnerships we would need to give Texas a run for its money as the center of energy in the United States of America. Who wants to start?
I'll say a few things and,
Okay.
and pass it on to John. So yeah, thanks. So I would say Wyoming certainly views itself as one of America's energy hubs already. And so the question is, how does it maintain that position in all of the transitions? And so we will continue, you know, the demise of coal and oil and gas is a little premature, I would say. So we're working on every way we can to ensure that we can get the most value that we have out of those existing assets, but then thinking about the transition. And so, for example, you don't think of Wyoming as a home of solar energy. However, it turns out that solar cells, we have as much sunshine as Arizona, I'm told, and we're a lot colder, which makes solar cells much more efficient. So we could become a major solar hub. And we've had a lot of discussions. We have a partnership with 9H Technologies, the 9H Foundation. We have a donation of solar cells for our College of Engineering, was it like 3,000 panels or something like that, that are enough, provide enough energy to power the College of Engineering, and of course provide great place for training of students in R&D for our faculty. So just one example. Wind power is another very, very big thing. I was told it's really windy in Laramie. I'm like, whatever. And then I got here, and that you just don't know what that means until you've lived here. So we have incredible wind energy, and we have to harness that. Of course, there are issues around what does it do into the view shed, as a new term that I've learned, or to migration paths of ungulates and so on. So there's a lot of research to be done there. That's another example. Of course, the nuclear energy, the demonstration plant that John mentioned, is a big deal. And these things, we don't have a nuclear engineering program here, but that in some ways is the least important piece of this. We can have partnerships with PNL and INL and Argonne and others to help fill in some of the gaps, but it's a lot about material science and process engineering and efficiencies and artificial intelligence and all of that. So it's a way for the whole university to rally behind these issues. Now I'll pass it on to John.
Okay, thank you. So, you know, when I look out 5 years from now and you think about obviously I'm going to think about nuclear first. You think about nuclear reactors, instead of talking about advanced reactors, we actually have new advanced reactors operating. The one in Kemmerer probably 5 years from now won't quite be operating, but it'll be very close. Think about all the opportunity. Let's just stop there for a minute. Think about reactor being constructed, not yet operating, all the workforce around it. We're not just talking PhD nuclear engineers or so forth. We're talking about trades, we're talking about welders, all the different job opportunities that go into that. When you start seeing that come together, also you start really seeing the opportunities for using nuclear and other energy for things beyond electricity, as I've already mentioned, hydrogen, perhaps upscaling the value of different products in that region, all sorts of opportunities come in. And then you think about, again, Washington State has an advanced reactor demonstration project going forward that is intended to be operational in the 2027, 2028 timeframe. All of this is jobs, manufacturing, all the kind of support that goes around that. We're going to have to, we'll come probably back to it. We're going to have to work on public acceptance, but all those opportunities. And then you think about the hydrogen hub opportunities that Deborah mentioned. Absolutely, this region ought to be one of those hubs that is selected, and what can grow out of that. And one of the things that I think two other things I think we ought to talk a little bit about, and one is the manufacturing opportunities around that. And what is the appropriate strategic, I'd say, manufacturing opportunities for this region around energy? There's already an awful lot of energy infrastructure and capability in this region, and how do we capitalize on that? And then, Governor Gordon wrote a very good op-ed recently about critical materials, critical minerals, rare earth minerals, and the issues there. Obviously, the conflict in Russia and Ukraine has highlighted those issues. In the Department of Energy, it's certainly drawn a lot of attention to not just your rare earth materials or minerals around other clean energy technologies, but also uranium. Wyoming has a little bit of uranium. And so what does those opportunities for this region look like? Can we mine uranium in an environmentally sustainable way, in a way that's accepted? And also we're seeing, so those two areas I wanted to kind of throw out to talk more about are manufacturing and then mining, not just the minerals themselves, but also mining tailings from old mines. There's a lot of opportunity in that space. All of that could be going on during the next 5 years to really position this region in an incredibly different way going forward.
I'm so glad you brought up the manufacturing dimension of this, because the Council on Competitiveness did a lot of work in partnership with the second Bush administration and the Obama administration on this nexus of the energy transformation, advanced manufacturing, and that if we were not prescient about this and made the investments, we would see, the poster child, A123 battery, massive investments, next generation batteries, and it all going to Russia because we couldn't China, because we couldn't manufacture at scale at cost. So what do you think are some of the incentives or the partnerships that need to be either accelerated or formed to think of manufacturing, not, as the dirty, dumb, dangerous, and disappearing, but very much at the forefront of creating this future? And I know we're going to talk later in the summit, Ed, about the cryptocurrency and some of the regulatory environment. What could be some of the incentives on the regulatory tax environment to knit together the advanced manufacturing with the energy renaissance of the future? I don't know who wants to start on that.
You want me to take that one first? Sure. So obviously tax incentives, providing land, providing various financial opportunities to bring companies in is always going to be, one of those tools in the toolbox. Policies, friendly policies with respect to these, and then opportunities within the region, whether that's, for example, because there's a lot of uranium here, that can create opportunities with respect to uranium processing and enrichment. So capitalizing on, again, the strategic opportunities in the region. I'll come back to policies for a moment, because a number of states are looking at how do we adjust policies to promote certain technologies or certain outcomes in the region. Washington State, for example, passed a law where all of their electricity will be generated with non-carbon emitting sources by 2045. I'm not saying that's the right policy for every state. It might not be the right policy for Wyoming, but there's a lot of different opportunities there to promote the goals that we seek. But in the specific case of manufacturing, I'd look at the energy opportunities in this region, and then what are the associated manufacturing opportunities that are strategic, and then look at policies to drive that.
And we're going to hear a lot about exciting Made in America advanced manufacturing when Tony Aquila speaks tomorrow, the CEO of Canoe. Ed.
Well, I'll just add a couple of points. So the first one is it comes to me back to, in part, digital technologies and training. And there's a really nice example up in Sheridan, in the middle of the state. Very, if you have a chance, very beautiful little town up by the Bighorns. There's an advanced manufacturing company there called Emit Technologies, and I toured their factory with the governor and was just astonished to hear their story. They made equipment and they made things that were important to the energy industry. When the energy industry took a downturn, because most of their equipment was digital, in effect, they could reprogram it and rapidly transform into making other things for other industries. And they actually increased their business by a large factor because of that. But one of the bottlenecks was having people who had software engineering skills and that sort of thing. So these things are very deeply connected. So for me, that was a motivator for helping to build up work on a statewide software engineering program, which we're doing. And then just the other thing I would say, kind of to John's point too, just incentives to help develop these things out, to have companies move into those directions when they're able to. Some companies are able to change with the times, and so they need incentives in order to make those transitions or capital investments. Maybe the third thing is just if some of you were on the tour this morning, you would have seen the maker spaces that we have. And as part of the Wyoming Innovation Partnership, we actually have makerspace equipment now that's being sent out across the state with community colleges and schools to get kids as early as kindergarten and basically involved in advanced manufacturing training, but at age 5 and 6, so we're preparing for the future that way.
What about the role of the workforce boards in the state and in your state? Are you engaging very strategically with that component of economic development as well as the economic development officials? Because often these two entities have a lot of resources and strategy, but they don't connect the workforce development with the economic development investments, which is sometimes hard to think that they don't, but that is the reality. Are you finding in Wyoming, and I'll say Idaho, the knitting together of these responsibilities so that what you're talking about, software development, is part of workforce development investment?
Absolutely. So we have representation here. We have Community College Commissioner Sandy Caldwell. We have Robin Cooley from Workforce Development. Where's Rob? There you are. We have the governor's representative here. We have Wyoming Business Council here as well. And these aren't just courtesy visits. We work like weekly with these folks as we build out our Wyoming Innovation Partnership strategy and so every one of these, it's like really all hands on deck, all of state effort in building out this ecosystem.
Sort of say ditto, but let me elaborate a little bit. Absolutely. It's a highly competitive market, as you all know, for talent. We recognize that. All the companies around our state and your states recognize that. And so we have to be very deliberate, very strategic about developing that, working with the universities, not just in Idaho, but Wyoming, Utah, all around us. And not just the traditional four-year universities, but the community colleges, as the president mentioned, absolutely critical. So it is I think you used the words all hands on deck with respect to workforce. One of the things that has been working in our favor a little bit, frankly, is the redistribution of population related to COVID. We found more and more people interested in living in Idaho and Wyoming and in this Mountain West region that can work remotely. Now, you can't work with nuclear fuels and materials remotely, but there are other things that you can do remotely. And so we're seeing a draw of talented, educated people to this region that is also very helpful for us.
Thank you for bringing that up, because that is something that you really have a strategic advantage, because there's no question these parts of the country are part of our magnificent physical heritage that we've been blessed with. I don't know how much time we have left. I don't know 10 minutes. Oh, good. Okay. So I think we could have a little bit of Q&A from the audience if anyone would like to ask our distinguished panelists a question. And I want you to think about, that earlier question I had on what are some of the big obstacles or barriers you're facing in addition to all the progress. So if you just identify yourself in the back.
Hello, Margaret Donahue with the CSIRO, Australia's National Lab. I have a question for John. You'd mentioned working with a lot of corporates to help further your science agendas, and just curious if you could go in a little bit more depth into the strategy and how a model in working with corporates, and if that has changed in the last couple of years.
Thank you. Before we answer your question, I just want to make sure everyone knows who CSIRO is. We're delighted you're here. CSIRO is the main research and commercialization, a big entity in Australia, kind of NSF and NIH and many others all together. And Larry Marshall, the CEO, is a member of the council. And we have a very deep strategic partnership between Australia and the United States, including, you know, in the mining and natural resources. It's a great area for collaboration. So this is about the industrial engagement, right?
Yes.
Ed, we'll start with you.
I think she wanted to particularly talk about the national lab, but
Oh, okay.
I have things to say too.
So let me start out. I think the question was really about what are we doing in the industry? If I could paraphrase, make sure I get it right. What are we doing, particularly in the last few years around industrial engagement with private companies? So a lot. And let me give you a couple examples. So as increased in nuclear energy and then broadened into increases in interest in hydrogen production and carbon capture and all these different things, some of them we work in significantly, some more supportive roles. Private companies have been trying to figure out, or it's not always, maybe I'll say it this way, it's not always been easy for the private companies to work with the national laboratories. There's 17 of them. Which one does what? If you go to them, they're going to all tell you they do everything. I mean, that's a joke, but they all have broad capabilities. And so how do you navigate through that? How do you work through agreements? Because ultimately it's agreements through the national laboratories with the Department of Energy. And there's all these different just wickets that a company has to go through. If you're a large company, you know, you have the resources to do that. You have a team of lawyers to work through all those agreements and so forth. If you're a small company, that becomes overwhelming. So we recognize that at the Idaho National Laboratory, but the Department of Energy recognizes it as well. So they've established specific programs to help private companies navigate. So I'm going to speak a little bit to what the Department of Energy has been doing. Programs like the Gateway for Accelerated Innovation in Nuclear. It's supposed to be a front door. If you want to work with the laboratories on nuclear energy, you go to them, they help you navigate through all that, and also try to help accelerate agreements and all the different things that have to be done. We also have at the laboratory established the National Reactor Innovation Center to help, again, be a front door to navigate through the national laboratories and work with them better. The Department of Energy is looking at programs all over with respect to what the interests are. But then what are we doing at the National Laboratory? We've actually created a different organization just focused on industry engagement within the last few years. And for these very purposes of helping companies understand how to work with us, also working on our processes and agreements to work at the speed of business. The national laboratories absolutely have to do this. And frankly, the Department of Energy and the federal government has to do this as well to meet any of the kind of timelines that these private companies need to work on to be competitive globally.
Kimberly Reed. Want to comment on this one?
I'll take 10 seconds. We have just started a campus-wide Center for Entrepreneurship and Innovation that is going to also focus on developing corporate partnerships and coordinating them across the university. Of course, a lot of professors and a lot of centers in the College of Engineering and so on have corporate partners, but we don't have like a campus-wide organization that really focuses on bringing it all together to take it to the next level. So we're doing that, and then also having that as a statewide organization working with community colleges and more things, but that's at least a start for what we're doing.
Kim.
Hi, Kimberly Reed. I'm a distinguished fellow with the Council on Competitiveness, but I was most recently the chair of the Export-Import Bank of the United States. And I had such a pleasure of working on nuclear issues and visiting heads of state around the world on that. It's a particular focus in Romania and Poland. So I just want to commend you on your work on this very important topic. Congress has such dictates that I feel handcuff us. And I just love your views on should we modernize things like the Defense Production Act. Also, I wish that we would treat nuclear as a renewable energy in legislation, because that would allow us to do so much more around the world. So just your views on that. And then also, as we look at what just happened with this supply chain disaster, should the Quad and the G7 form a new entity to help with coordination on these issues around the world?
Thank you.
So first of all, thanks for your comments on that. One of the struggles that nuclear energy has in particular that you would know well, but I'll just shine a light on, is a lot of different policies, standards, laws are written as renewable energy as opposed to clean energy. Different financing vehicles like Ex-Im Bank and others have not always been favorable to financing nuclear projects. Even a lot of different funds will exclude nuclear energy projects from their funding. So that's a huge problem, a huge challenge. At the end of the day, these projects require financing. And so it's absolutely essential. And so we're seeing some movements. We're seeing movements in the EU on the taxonomy around nuclear as well, although there's still some challenges there that need to be worked through. So absolutely, whenever you see renewable energy standards or renewable laws, please, help change those to clean energy. If nuclear can't compete with renewables, so be it. But give it a chance to at least be a part of that mix. And in terms of, there's a lot of different opportunities around supply chain and globally looking at where we're getting different materials from what I'll call friendly countries and better collaboration on that. So we can talk offline maybe on specifics, but absolutely we need to be collaborating and partnering on those opportunities.
And I would just add, that one of the very important recommendations in the first phase of our work, competing in the next economy, was calling for technology statecraft. And we were really thrilled and honored that early in the Biden administration, the actual language we used was in a little paraphrase, but nonetheless, it was in one of Secretary Blinken's speeches. And we're seeing now this being implemented much faster with the aftermath of Putin's invasion. The president was just in Japan, established the core partnership, competitiveness and resiliency. The U.S. Council on Competitiveness and the Japan Innovation Network are already poised to be implementers of that through the commission. So I think we're going to see under the technology statecraft really unleashing a lot of very strategic global collaboration with our close allies. We have a few minutes left, so I want to give both of our leaders here the opportunity to kind of project into the future, but also say something that maybe is provocative. If there's anything you could do right now in your respective worlds to accelerate this regional innovation capacity and development, what would it be? Ed, I know you're a real change agent. You've come here in a short time, done amazing things, but there's still things to be done. So think of that, and then we'll end on a positive note, but also for you, John, at the National Labs. One, I think in the National Labs, it's very hard to collaborate in some of these big government programs outside of energy because of the way the appropriations are controlled. NSF can't invest in DOE and vice versa. That's one. Ed.
Well, let's see, there's a lot of ground in there. I would say in terms of things that I'd really like to see us be able to do in Wyoming, things they're working on, it's not exactly, maybe what we're doing itself is revolutionary, but we have plans in place now. So really to focus on executing to make sure that, for example, we have functioning innovation hubs that are supported properly across every one of our regional spaces of community colleges. Also, to think about the really effective coupling with groups outside the state. So one thing I worked on a lot in Illinois was how do you couple rural and urban economies between Chicago and the rest of the state. In Illinois, we actually don't have an urban economy. I mean, we're the third largest city in the state, actually 30,000 people. And so we have to think about how do we go without that. And most of our neighbors don't have those either. Idaho, Colorado and Utah, of course, do. But what could we do, particularly with some partners like the labs and so on, to really emphasize mutual benefit? And so that would be, for me, a next step on building on what we've already begun to put in place this year.
Great, thank you, John.
Yeah, so just say, as I said before, there's been just a huge shift in the opportunity space. Again, if we were sitting here 5 years ago, it would be a very different conversation. In fact, 5 years ago, I was at Idaho National Laboratory, not in this current role, but thinking about we really ought to up our regional engagement. And the opportunities really weren't there, or they were very different and very kind of, I'd say, small. So now think about fast forward and how we take advantage of these opportunities. I would say work across state lines and really lean in, because if you, again, look at the opportunities for Wyoming, Idaho, Utah, Colorado, Montana, this region, the resources, the things that we've already talked about, and where it needs to go to position itself, not just 5 years from now, but 10 years from now, to be national and even global leader in energy. It's going to require people like Governor Gordon or Governor Little really leaning in and creating those opportunities. And if we do that, and if we collaborate, and in my world, like I need to be collaborating with my other national laboratories in the region as well, it's unstoppable what this region is capable of in the energy realm. And I'll just note, if I understand it right, Wyoming is the largest energy exporter of any state in the nation. And it can not only keep that, it could actually, quite significantly increase that through investments and our actions right now and in the near term.
Great. I think, as we go into the next part of our program, I want to thank both leaders here, leaders of the summit, but also leaders of very, very important institutions in our innovation infrastructure. And certainly from the perspective of the Council on Competitiveness, we see the work we're doing here. Yes, thought leadership, new ideas, but also a test bed. This is a very important test bed for our country. And I think all the ingredients are here, and how you all are poised to knit them together. And maybe tonight, Ed, when the governor's with us, it'd be interesting to hear his strategy on how he's working with his fellow governors in the region as well. So thank you. And I know we're going to have a working group session on this later this afternoon and tomorrow, but I think we set the frame very nicely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.